In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Northern California was gripped by fear as a mysterious killer known only as the Zodiac taunted police and the public with cryptic letters and brutal murders. Who was he, and why was he never caught? Imagine a quiet suburban evening shattered by a chilling sense of unease. People in small towns, tucked away from the world's chaos, felt their safety slip away like the slow tick of a clock, counting down, unknowingly, to terror. This was a time before social media, before constant news updates. People didn't have the luxury of endless information. What they did have was fear and uncertainty. Fear of a killer they couldn't understand. Fear of a predator who seemed always one step ahead. In the heart of this fear, a name started to echo through headlines: the Zodiac Killer. But here's the thing, no one truly knew who he was. He wasn't a random face in a crowd. He wasn't a stranger who just happened to get away. He was someone who took joy in the game. He wanted to be noticed. He wanted to be feared. And for years he was. Each letter he sent was another invitation into his mind, another piece of his twisted puzzle. "I like killing people because it is so much fun," one letter claimed. "It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all." These weren't the words of a man who wanted to be caught. They were the words of a man playing a game, one that no one had figured out how to win. With each brutal act, each cryptic message, he pulled the strings. He danced in the shadows, always just out of reach, yet always leaving behind clues. Clues that taunted, mocked, and dared the authorities to follow. As the bodies piled up, the terror spread. By the time the Zodiac's reign of fear ended, he had taken at least 5 known victims, 5 innocent lives, each cut short by a man who wanted to remain elusive, whose every step seemed calculated, designed to outwit anyone who tried to stop him. But as time passed, something else happened. The Zodiac disappeared into thin air. No more letters. No more murders. The investigation stalled. The people, those terrified individuals who once stared at his sketch in every newspaper, slowly turned their attention elsewhere. The Zodiac Killer wasn't just a murderer. He was a master of evasion, a dark figure whose identity remains one of the most chilling and unsolved mysteries of all time. And so we are left with questions that linger unanswered. Who was he? Was he someone we passed in the street? Someone we spoke to without knowing the darkness they carried? Why was he never caught? Was he cleverer than the entire law enforcement system? Or, more terrifyingly, was he simply too invisible to ever be caught? As we dive into the twisted story of the Zodiac Killer, let's unravel the case that has confounded detectives, intrigued the public, and left behind an eerie, unanswered question that continues to haunt us. Who was the Zodiac, and where is he now? In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Northern California became a place defined not by its breathtaking landscapes or thriving cities, but by something far more sinister. The sprawling hills and picturesque bays of San Francisco, the quiet towns tucked into the edges of the Bay Area, would soon become the backdrop to one of the most terrifying and mysterious chapters in criminal history. A place where beauty and darkness collided, where ordinary people found themselves victims of an unseen predator. This was the stage where the Zodiac Killer would make his mark. It wasn't just the murder of innocent lives that set this case apart. It was the taunting, the terror, and the thrill of evasion. The Zodiac didn't just kill. He played with those who sought to stop him. Law enforcement was left reeling, questioning their every step, every clue. For years, they followed false leads, chased shadows, and were constantly reminded by the killer's cryptic messages that they were always one step behind. He wasn't just a murderer. He was a puzzle, a challenge they couldn't solve. The victims, young and full of life, were not the focus of the Zodiac. He didn't care about their names. They were pawns in a game that played out across the quiet streets of Vallejo, the desolate shores of Lake Berryessa, and even the heart of San Francisco. What the Zodiac wanted was something else entirely. He wanted power. He wanted fear. He wanted to be remembered. And he was. The investigation was spearheaded by determined law enforcement officers. who found themselves chasing down dead ends and false leads at every turn. With no DNA technology, no modern forensics, they had to rely on what they had: witness statements, intuition, and a deep, unyielding desire to bring the killer to justice. But despite their efforts, the Zodiac remained elusive. Cryptologists, too, found themselves caught in the Zodiac's web. The letters he sent were filled with cryptic ciphers, an unsolvable riddle, one that seemed to mock their intelligence. Each coded message was a piece of the Zodiac's mind, a chilling glimpse into his twisted psyche, but no one could crack it, at least not right away. His letters didn't just demand attention, they demanded admiration for his intellect. And so, this case grew not only in infamy, but in significance. The Zodiac Killer became a symbol of one of America's darkest unresolved mysteries. For years, his identity remained a question mark. Despite advancements in technology, despite new breakthroughs in criminal investigation, the Zodiac Killer slipped through the cracks, leaving his mark on history as an unsolved enigma. The true horror wasn't just in the brutal killings. It was in the way the Zodiac continued to elude capture. His legacy, forged in fear and defiance, remains a haunting reminder of the killer who outsmarted the system, and to this day, remains a shadow in the Bay Area's past. The story of the Zodiac Killer unfolds like a nightmare. It's not a tale of a single brutal act, but of a pattern, a chilling pattern of violence that escalated, one murder at a time, as the Zodiac grew bolder and more brazen in his taunts to the public and police. The horror started in the late 1960s and quickly became a nightmare that haunted Northern California for years. It all began on December 20th, 1968, on a quiet night along Lake Herman Road near Vallejo. Betty Lou Jensen, just 16 years old, and her boyfriend, 17-year-old David Faraday, were parked in David's car like countless couples before them. They were just teenagers, full of life, making memories under the stars. But their peaceful evening was shattered by a ruthless, brutal attack. A man approached their car and fired multiple shots, killing both of them. There was no robbery, no motive other than the sheer randomness of violence. These were the Zodiac's first confirmed victims, though no one knew that yet. The killer's identity remained a mystery, a terrifying ghost. Just months later, on July 4th, 1969, the killer struck again. This time, Darlene Ferrin, 22, and Michael Mageau, 19, were parked at Blue Rock Springs Park. It was late, and they were minding their own business, until the same shadowed figure emerged from the darkness. This time, he didn't just shoot them once. He shot them repeatedly, in cold blood, before walking away from the scene without a care. Darlene didn't survive the attack, but Michael, barely clinging to life, somehow managed to make it through. His testimony was crucial. He described a man who looked almost ordinary. But that ordinary face, those unremarkable features, hid something far more sinister. The Zodiac had already begun to make his mark, and this was only the beginning. Months later, on September 27, 1969, the Zodiac would escalate once more, this time at Lake Berryessa. Brian Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia and Shepard, 22, were enjoying a relaxing afternoon at the lake. As they sat by the water, a man approached them, wearing a strange hooded costume and carrying a knife. He told them he was an escaped convict, and then, without warning, he tied them up. He forced them to the edge of the lake, where he proceeded to stab both of them repeatedly, killing Cecilia and leaving Brian for dead. But this time, the Zodiac made a mistake. He lingered too long. He let Brian get a good look at his face, and even more damning, he let Brian hear him speak. The Zodiac Killer didn't realize it, but this moment would prove crucial. Brian survived, and his description of the killer's appearance would become a piece of the puzzle that the police desperately clung to. Just weeks after this brutal attack, on October 11, 1969, the Zodiac's killing spree would take an even darker turn, this time in San Francisco. Paul Stein, a 29-year-old cab driver, was working his usual shift. He picked up a passenger, a man who seemed entirely unremarkable. But within minutes of driving, that passenger shot Paul in the head, killing him instantly. The Zodiac's coldness knew no bounds, and once again, he vanished into the night, leaving nothing behind but confusion and fear. And then came the letters. The Zodiac didn't just kill, he relished in it, taunting the police and the media. In July 1969, he sent letters to 3 major newspapers: the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. In each letter, he included 1/3 of a cipher, a code that he claimed would reveal his identity. But the letters weren't just cryptic puzzles. They were personal. They were dripping with contempt, mocking the very authorities that were desperately trying to catch him. The Zodiac's words were chilling. "I like killing people because it is so much fun." The more they tried to decipher the letters, the more they realized they were dealing with someone far more intelligent and far more dangerous than they had imagined. In August 1969, the Zodiac sent another letter, this time to the Los Angeles Times. He didn't stop at boasting about his crimes. He went further, confirming his involvement in the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, a young woman who had been killed years earlier, in 1966. Bates' murder had never been linked to the Zodiac before, but now, the pieces of a disturbing puzzle began to come together. The killer had been active long before anyone realized. By November 1969, the Zodiac had sent a new cipher to the San Francisco Chronicle, the infamous Z340, a cipher that baffled cryptographers for decades. It was a string of 340 characters, seemingly random at first glance. But the Zodiac wasn't finished. He had more messages, more taunts, and more violence to come. From 1970 to 1974, he sent even more letters, more postcards, more cryptic messages, and more threats. He remained a shadow, just out of reach, always a step ahead. But no one could crack him. No one could catch him. And his reign of terror continued, unchecked, for years. The Zodiac Killer had become something more than a criminal. He had become a figure of fear, a living legend, taunting the public and mocking the very institutions designed to bring him to justice. The cryptic letters, the chilling murders, the media circus. He had created something that was, in some twisted way, a masterpiece of terror. But the questions remained. Who was he? And, perhaps most terrifying of all, why was he never caught? As we continue to peel back the layers of this unsettling story, we must remember one thing. The Zodiac didn't just kill people. He played a game, a deadly game, and for more than half a century, no one has been able to beat him. The question of his identity still haunts us, and the answers, if they exist, are buried deep in the twisted mind of a man who may still be walking among us. Despite decades of relentless investigation, despite the countless hours poured into solving the case, the Zodiac Killer's true identity remains shrouded in darkness. The chilling reality is this. After all these years, we still don't know who he was. We still don't know what drove him to kill. We don't know why he reveled in taunting the police, why he dared them to catch him when he clearly knew they never could. The questions persist unanswered, gnawing at us with every new lead that turns into nothing, every new clue that leads to another dead end. The case has become one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in criminal history. And yet, despite the passage of time, it still lingers, because there is something deeply unsettling about an enemy who is unknown, whose face has never been seen, whose name no one can say. The Zodiac isn't just an unsolved case. He is a symbol of the darkness that we may never fully understand. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying part of all. But there were survivors, people who lived to tell their tale. One of the most chilling accounts comes from Brian Hartnell, the sole survivor of the Lake Berryessa attack. Brian, just 20 years old at the time, had no idea what was about to happen to him and his friend, Cecilia and Shepard. They had parked by the lake, enjoying a peaceful afternoon, when a man approached them, wearing a strange hooded costume with a symbol drawn on it, a symbol that would forever be linked to the killer. Brian remembers the events clearly, every detail etched into his mind forever. The man approached them, seemingly polite at first, but it quickly became clear that this wasn't a random encounter. The killer tied them up calmly, as if he were in complete control. He didn't rush. He didn't make a single noise. His silence was more terrifying than anything Brian could have imagined. Then came the stabbing. Brian was lucky enough to survive the brutal attack, but Cecilia wasn't. She died that day, and Brian lived with the haunting memories. He could still hear the man's voice, the eerie calm in his words, the chilling way he described his actions. But what haunted Brian the most was the killer's ability to stay calm, to stay composed as he took life with such ease. The description Brian gave of a man who seemed ordinary, yet felt anything, but became one of the only real pieces of evidence that police had. But despite this vital clue, the killer slipped away again, vanishing into the shadows as he had done before. The cryptic messages he left behind only deepened the mystery. One of the most perplexing, and perhaps the most chilling, was the Z340 cipher, sent to the San Francisco Chronicle in 1969. A string of 340 symbols, seemingly random, but undeniably deliberate. It was a challenge, an invitation, a riddle that no one could solve for decades. The Zodiac taunted the police with his messages, daring them to decode his twisted thoughts, his fragmented secrets. And for years, it remained unsolved. People pored over the cipher, cryptographers, journalists, investigators. But no one could break it. It became a symbol of the Zodiac's power, his intellectual superiority, his control over the investigation. Then, in 2020, after more than 50 years of silence, a team of codebreakers finally cracked the Z340 cipher. The message that was revealed was chilling, not because it revealed the killer's identity, but because it hinted at the mindset of a man who reveled in his own infamy. The message, when decoded, read, "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show, which brings up a point about me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner because I now have enough slaves to work for me." There it was again, the same twisted arrogance, the same mocking tone that had defined the Zodiac Killer's letters from the beginning. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't remorseful. He was enjoying every moment of his infamy, every moment of fear he instilled in the hearts of his victims, their families, and the public. Even in his cryptic messages, he was playing the game, taunting, teasing, and refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of knowing who he really was. The Z340 cipher's solution did nothing to bring the killer closer to justice. In fact, it only deepened the mystery. The Zodiac's true identity remained just out of reach, his words still haunting us. But for the survivors, for those who lived through the terror, the memories are real. The pain is real, and the search for justice continues. The Zodiac Killer's legacy is one of fear, but also one of frustration. We know his crimes. We know the terror he instilled, but we don't know him. And perhaps that is the most unsettling thought of all, that the killer, the monster, might still be out there, living his life without consequence. As the investigation into the Zodiac Killer stretched on, the search for answers became a relentless pursuit of the smallest details. Each shred of evidence, an elusive thread that might unravel the mystery. But the more investigators dug, the more they realized how little they truly had to go on. The killer had been careful, almost meticulous, in covering his tracks. And yet, there were clues, fragments, scattered throughout the crime scenes, waiting to be pieced together. The first of these clues was the Zodiac's choice of weapon. At Lake Herman Road, the Zodiac had used a gun to kill Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday. But in his subsequent murders, he demonstrated a preference for using a knife, a decision that raised unsettling questions about his psyche. Was he moving closer to his victims, enjoying the intimacy of the kill? Or was it something darker, that the knife allowed him to feel more in control, to savor the violence in a way that a gun simply couldn't? Whatever the reason, this shift in method told investigators that they were dealing with someone who was evolving, someone who enjoyed the act itself, who reveled in the control. Then came the eerie detail discovered at the crime scene at Lake Berryessa. When Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were attacked, the Zodiac approached them wearing a hooded costume, one with a strange symbol on it. It was a symbol that would soon become synonymous with the killer, a crossed circle, a haunting image that, when combined with the words he wrote, would form the dark signature of his reign of terror. The symbol wasn't just a logo, it was a statement. The Zodiac wasn't just a killer, he was a brand. He was marking his territory, leaving his symbol for the world to see, daring them to understand it, to decipher it. He wasn't just committing murders, he was performing an elaborate game, a game that only he knew the rules to. As the Zodiac continued to strike, investigators began to consider the possibility that the killer was someone from the area. Was he just a random predator? Or was he someone with a deeper connection to the places he attacked? The police had little to go on beyond witness descriptions and the few physical clues left behind. But then, the world of potential suspects began to take shape. One name that frequently came up in investigations was Arthur Lee Allen, a convicted child molester with a violent history. Allen seemed to fit the profile of the Zodiac in many ways. He was known to have lived in the area at the time of the murders, and his odd behaviors, such as wearing a wristwatch with the Zodiac symbol on it, only deepened the suspicion surrounding him. Allen was questioned multiple times, but despite the mounting circumstantial evidence, no concrete proof ever linked him to the crimes. His odd personality and possible connection to the Zodiac made him a prime suspect for years. But even his death in 1992 did not provide the answers everyone had hoped for. Then there was Richard Gajkowski, a journalist with a penchant for writing cryptic, almost absurdly boastful articles. Gajkowski's resemblance to police sketches of the Zodiac was uncanny, and many believed that his writing style matched the tone of the Zodiac's letters. But again, as with Allen, investigators were never able to pin anything definitive on Gajkowski, and he died in 2004, leaving the case to remain shrouded in uncertainty. But perhaps the most intriguing suspect of all came to light much later: Gary Francis Post. In 2021, new forensic evidence pointed to Post, a convicted killer who had served time for other violent crimes. Post's name resurfaced when a team of independent investigators discovered striking similarities between the crime scene photos and an old photograph of Post. Though the evidence linking him directly to the Zodiac's killings remains circumstantial, his name continues to be considered a strong candidate by some, particularly after cryptic details surfaced that seemed to align with his past. But as with all other suspects, the case remains frustratingly unresolved. And then there's the issue of forensic analysis. In the modern era, DNA evidence has become the cornerstone of solving cold cases. But the Zodiac Killer's case presented a unique challenge. Crime scenes often lacked the kinds of biological evidence that would typically provide a breakthrough. Even when DNA was found, it was limited and, at times, contaminated. The idea of a definitive DNA match remained elusive for years. But advances in modern forensic science have breathed new life into the case. In 2020, a renewed push to use DNA testing on letters and envelopes sent by the Zodiac led to new revelations. The DNA analysis, though not conclusive, showed traces of genetic material that could one day unlock the identity of the killer. Still, despite the breakthroughs in forensic technology, the Zodiac Killer's true identity remains a mystery. His name continues to elude investigators, and with every new lead or potential suspect, the questions only seem to multiply. Was the Zodiac someone who got away with murder? A figure who simply moved on with his life, leaving behind only chaos? Or did he die? And if so, who took his secrets to the grave with them? As investigators sift through the past, one thing is certain. The Zodiac's legacy is not one of clean answers, but of riddles, questions that refuse to be answered. The clues are there, hidden in plain sight, but piecing them together seems impossible. As technology advances, and as new suspects emerge, the hope that one day, the Zodiac will be unmasked grows. But until then, his true identity remains just out of reach, leaving behind only the echo of his chilling symbol, forever stamped on history. As the years passed, the Zodiac Killer faded into the background of many people's minds. But just when it seemed as though the case would remain unsolved forever, something unexpected happened. In 2020, cryptologists Sam Blake, David Orenchak, and Jarl Van Eyck, using cutting-edge methods and decades of analysis, did what had once seemed impossible. They cracked the infamous Z340 cipher, a code that had baffled the police, cryptographers, and investigators for over 50 years. The moment the cipher was decoded, it was like the world took a collective breath. But the message that was revealed, it wasn't a revelation in the way everyone had hoped. No name, no concrete identity, no direct clue that would have solved the case. Instead, what the cryptographers found was something far more chilling. A glimpse into the mind of a killer who had been playing a twisted game for years. The message read, "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show, which brings up a point about me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner because I now have enough slaves to work for me." These words weren't just an arrogant taunt. They were a glimpse into a deeply disturbed psyche. The Zodiac Killer was not just a cold-blooded murderer. He was a man who found amusement in his victim's suffering, someone who enjoyed the fear he instilled in others. The reference to slaves hints at a disturbing mindset, one where the killer felt that his actions were justified, that his murders somehow gave him power, control, even a twisted sense of superiority. He was above them, the law, society, everyone. The cryptic message was an unsettling reminder that the Zodiac saw himself as a godlike figure, one whose destiny was to rule over the lives he extinguished. The fact that this message was decoded by modern cryptographers, not law enforcement, was a stark reminder of just how elusive this case had been. It also underscored a sobering truth. Despite technological advancements and relentless investigation, the Zodiac Killer had always been ahead of his time, outsmarting those who pursued him. But the breakthrough didn't end there. As forensic technology progressed, new theories began to emerge, reigniting interest in the case and offering new possibilities for finally identifying the Zodiac. Advances in DNA analysis, which had solved countless cold cases in recent years, offered a glimmer of hope. The possibility of identifying the killer through DNA from letters he had sent or from the crime scenes where he had left his mark became a focal point of renewed investigations. Could the same technology that had solved other infamous cases finally bring closure to this one? Then, there were the emerging theories about new suspects, some of whom were already well known, and others who had only recently entered the conversation. One of the most shocking of these theories came in 2021, when Gary Francis Post, a convicted killer with a violent history, was named as a potential suspect. Some investigators and researchers began to connect the dots between Post's past crimes and the Zodiac's pattern. Photographs of Post from his time in prison seemed to bear a striking resemblance to police sketches of the Zodiac. And with this theory came new questions. Could the Zodiac have been hiding in plain sight, a man with a criminal history that had never been fully explored? Others pointed to different names, men whose lives overlapped with the timeline of the Zodiac killings. The idea that the Zodiac might have been someone who had slipped under the radar for decades, the kind of person who blended in so seamlessly that no one ever suspected him, only added to the frustration and intrigue of the case. With each new suspect, each new theory, the mystery deepened. It was as though the more we learned, the more questions surfaced. With DNA evidence, a renewed interest in past suspects, and the groundbreaking cipher revelation, the Zodiac Killer story was far from over. Every new piece of the puzzle only seemed to complicate the picture. Was the Zodiac still out there, laughing at the world's futile attempts to find him? Was his identity one that would only be discovered in the coldest of circumstances, with a single piece of evidence falling into place by chance? And as these twists and turns unfold, we're left wondering, is the Zodiac Killer truly gone, or did he simply vanish into the shadows, knowing that his legacy of terror will never be forgotten, no matter how long it takes to find him? Despite the many years of relentless investigation, the Zodiac Killer's true identity remains as elusive as ever. After decades of searching, countless theories, and the examination of numerous suspects, the question still lingers. Who was he? Despite the advances in technology, the break in the case that seemed so inevitable has never materialized. The killer's cryptic letters, his taunting messages, and the chilling symbol he left behind continue to haunt the streets of Northern California. He left no clear trail for law enforcement, no obvious mistake. His last letter was sent in 1974, and with it, the silence followed. Since then, The case has become not just an unsolved mystery, but a symbol of one of the most disturbing and complex enigmas in criminal history. What makes this case so deeply unsettling is that the Zodiac wasn't just a faceless killer. He was a master of manipulation, a man who seemed to want nothing more than to stay hidden in the shadows while also enjoying the chaos and fear he stirred. The Zodiac Killer was not an ordinary murderer. He was someone who reveled in the cat-and-mouse game with the authorities. His pride, his arrogance, his insistence on leaving behind messages for the world to decipher. These weren't the actions of someone who wanted to be caught. He wanted to be admired for his intelligence, for his ability to outsmart those who sought him. But here we are, still asking the same questions that were posed decades ago. Who was the Zodiac Killer? Why did he do it? And why was he never caught? Despite all the time that has passed, despite the endless files of evidence, the case continues to captivate the public's imagination. It remains a subject of fascination, an unresolved puzzle that leaves us wondering what it would take to solve it. Books, documentaries, podcasts, and online forums dedicated to the Zodiac continue to thrive, with each new theory or potential lead keeping the hope of solving the mystery alive. The case has inspired an entire generation of amateur detectives, cryptographers, and true crime enthusiasts, all working together in the hopes that they can uncover what the police could not. And maybe that's part of the allure. The Zodiac Killer's identity is not just a question of justice. It's a question of fear. For the public, for the victims' families, and for anyone who's ever looked into the case, the killer represents something primal, the unknown, the untouchable, the person who can slip through the cracks of society's defenses. The Zodiac remains a shadow, a nameless ghost in history. As new technology continues to emerge, DNA analysis becomes more sophisticated, and the public interest in cold cases continues to grow. There's a small glimmer of hope. Perhaps one day, the truth will be uncovered. Maybe someone will finally piece together the puzzle that has haunted law enforcement and the public for over half a century. But until that day comes, the Zodiac Killer's mystery endures. The case remains open, the questions remain unanswered, and the legend of the Zodiac Killer lives on. Who was he? Where did he go? The answers may never come, but that only fuels the intrigue, the obsession, and the terrifying idea that perhaps the Zodiac is out there, somewhere, still watching us. His mystery never to be solved. What do you think happened to the Zodiac Killer? Was he caught and just never identified? Or did he disappear into the shadows forever, never to be found? Was he someone living in plain sight, perhaps someone close to us, someone we might even know? Or has he truly escaped justice, taking his secrets to the grave? We want to hear your thoughts, your theories. The case of the Zodiac Killer has captivated minds for over 50 years, and we're far from done trying to understand this unsolved mystery. So, share your ideas in the comments below. Could you be the one to crack the case? If you enjoyed this dive into one of history's most perplexing true crime stories, make sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a chilling story like this one. Stay with us as we continue to explore the most baffling, unsolved cases in true crime history. This mystery might never truly be solved, but the search for answers continues. And you're part of that search.